Of Sales Chatter with DJ and Dan. Hey, you know what? Today's a very exciting day. Very exciting day. Now we've got a special guest. Usually our guest is here live, but we are going to talk data. We're going to talk how data in sales actually transpires and gives you more sales, better sales, more educated, and how you can not look like, be the pro you need to be in today's market.
To the HPLS podcast. Live, relevant, and high performance information, conversations, and education weekly.
DJ, my man. So here's the thing, right?
I love those intros.
Oh, what's that? Sorry.
I said I love your intros.
So here's the thing, right? So data, right? So going back 3 years now, the gentleman we're going to have on today, Dean Crook, he's the head analyst at DAT Analytics. And Dean said something that from that moment on has been ingrained both mentally and in everything I do. And it's data is the new oil. Now, I want today's conversation. Dean always drops some serious gold when it comes to these conversations. But here's the thing. When we think of data, right? Most people think, well, Dan, data is, how many loads do you do? Kind of what's your volumes? What's the process? How does it work? Blah, blah, blah. But there's so many levels of data that I think as sales reps, we need to pay attention to. Right. And we really need to focus on it because just for example, and I know that this conversation is probably going to happen a lot today, but the $600 million or $6 billion infrastructure bill, whatever it was, $1 trillion infrastructure bill, 600 billion.
I don't think they know the actual number. Yeah.
No, but so anyway, long story short, the way when I was reading about it, based on the calculations, based on kind of depending on what where the money actually in the end gets allotted, it was close to 1.47 million new truckloads generated from the product that we're going to need, because infrastructure takes on a whole realm of possibilities. But above and beyond that, right? So there's data there. That's one chunk of data. Then you have another chunk of data that says, okay, what companies are going to get that? And from my understanding, a lot of it's going to be controlled at the government level. So this then creates another chunk of data that we're going to talk about, where how do we get involved in the government, right? But then another chunk of data is, how is this shipper going to be bringing in the raw product in order to produce it to send, or the manufacturing facility bringing the raw product, send it out. Then the other chunk of data is, what are the goals, dreams, aspirations, desires for these projects, right? So we've got data chunks coming in from all over the place.
Everywhere.
And these data chunks give us every single piece of information we need to deliver the right message to the right person, right? And it's not funny, but it's interesting because I often see salespeople, managers, like people of pretty high caliber, go into a sale without collecting the data first, right? I obviously, everyone watching, listening, I have programs, I have sales training programs. DJ and I are involved in a lot of these different things, but not one time will I ever offer a program until I have a conversation, because I don't know, like for a sales rep that is just interested in, being part of something, but never does the work, that's not a salesperson I can help, because they're not doing the work. That makes sense? So, data comes in those chunks, and data allows us, and here's the nucleus, I believe, and probably what turned me on to this idea of data more often than not. The nucleus is, if I understand the data, if I understand the goals, dreams, desires, mission, mandates, of the department, of the individual, and of the company. Think about how, and I don't even know if this is proper English, how much better decisions we can, I don't even know if that was probably, I probably really hacked that up. Yeah, I know. I can see. I can see you thinking about. No,
Yeah,
I
I'm
think
trying
that's
to
so.
how much
You can
better.
you can
Yeah,
you can make better decisions.
yeah,
You can
absolutely.
like if you understand
If
those
you're making,
tentacles.
I mean, not to cut you off, but if you're making decisions without the data, you don't even know what you're making decisions on. I mean, it's
You're
just it's
blindly
just
making decisions.
yeah,
Exactly,
yeah.
and I guess that was probably the much better way to put it. Thank you.
It's, and it's just you, but you touched on it too. If you're going into a sale with the mindset of that you're going to sell this, I'm selling this. You don't even know what you're selling. Like, wait till they give you, and you got to do the research, do the qualifying, and that's where I think a lot of salespeople fail in the beginning. Is they come in
Hmm.
guns blazing. I'm going to sell you this. Well, what if that's not the fix? What if you
Hmm.
you're trying to cut price, and their struggle is they can get all the cheap freight they want, but they want service, they want reliability, they want communication. They want to know. Uh, then you're missing. And we talked about that all
Yeah.
the
Yeah, and I think probably this is probably Ryan Facebook years. The best thing about
time.
data is it's free and available easily to become an expert to your customers. Yeah, and that's the thing, right? When we like if we understand markets, right? Because we pay attention to the data in the market. If we understand capacity, because we're paying attention to data on the capacity side. If we understand needs, desires, ambitions, mandates, because we have the data, and data is just, I mean, data can just be a conversation. That you don't need to do a lot of research at times to get data. Like you want to know how a lane is really performing. You want to know what some of the challenges are, especially at this time of year, where you could have freak snowstorms going through the mountains. And what
Yeah.
happens? Your data will come from calling your top five suppliers and say, hey, tell me what like some of the issues you're having in this lane, in this lane, in this lane. Like, what are some of the things that customers are saying? Like, data could be a conversation with friends, could be a conversation with colleagues, it could be a conversation with your team. Hey, team that's doing all the dispatching, what's happening in the market today? Like, I think this is happening based on what everybody's saying, but what's the real deal? Like the Marines in the trenches, the ones digging the ditches, like what is that? What's happening on that side of it that can help me be a better salesperson? And I don't think salespeople do enough of this. Like I don't think we communicate enough with the people that have the data. Like when Dean comes on, and he should be on in the next 5 or 10 minutes. When Dean comes on, like I communicate with Dean all the time, all the time. Like we go back and forth all the time. I get an article. I'm like, "Hey, Dean, did you see this article?" And send it out. What's your thoughts on it? And he comes back with thoughts, and then I go back with thoughts. Like it's the follow up between follow ups process, but you're doing it in your relationships, not just to attain business, right?
See,
Because
but
I go for it.
you hit it right on the head there too. I mean, it's the conversation. That's where you're getting the information. Uh, I think we all. I mean, as humans, I think again, just going back to that level of it, we just think we always have the right answer without really dissecting and getting all information. We just always think we have the solution or the answer. But if we would just ask the right questions and do the right research, uh, we'll figure out what the right answer is with getting that data. Again, it's the data that's going to give us the answers, but we have to be willing to receive it. I think that's part of the problem. We go into as salespeople, we go into a lot of sales pitches with, well, I'm going to say this, 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 and this is how I sell things, and we're not listening enough to what they're telling us. They are going to give us the answers. You just got to ask the right
Mhm.
questions and want the data.
Exactly. Good morning, Gary. Glad you joined us, my
Yeah,
friend.
yeah, yeah.
Good morning, everybody. We're talking about data. We're talking about how data can impact our sales, how data can impact our decisions, how data can impact our choices, the questions we ask, how we move and when we move. And our guest coming on today is going to be Dean Crook, from head analyst at DAT Analytics. Dean and I go back almost 2 years now, I guess. Well, it was probably 2 years ago, not three, that I went to that TCA event. And immediately after, well, we're happy you're here, brother. We're happy you're here, Gary. About a week after that, the second the event was done, like I was all over Dean. right? I was like, just everything he was saying. But you're right, DJ. To go back to it, you know, data comes from so many different places, like so many different places, right? Morning, Jeffrey. How you doing, brother?
Hey, Jeff.
And the data that we have, actually, you know what? I just realized I totally didn't change the name of today's show. Shit. Sorry. That's horrible, man. Oh, talk about being
Uh,
behind the eight ball. Geez, I can't believe that. So it's not the same show as last week. I'll change the updates. That sucks. I wonder if I do it now if it's gonna work. DJ, why
uh,
don't you take over for a
yeah,
minute?
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
gonna I'm gonna see
No,
if I can get this.
absolutely. Well, oh man, he disappeared on me. Well, I guess it's just me. Speaking of data, and kind of following up with data, Dean. So Dean, I did watch. So Dan has had Dean on quite a few times on his Inception calls and a few other calls with his programs. And being in the Inception program, I was lucky enough to catch one of those calls with Dean. And man, he is a wealth of knowledge and a wealth of data. So it is going to be really nice to kind of hear what he has to say. Obviously, coming from that, you guys know out there, and any of you new freight brokers out there, DAT and Truckstop are the main two sources for load boards, and for DAT especially is kind of the main source, along with Freight Waves, of just what's going on in the pulse of what's going on in the industry. So, but again, going back to what kind of Dan was touching on too, when we're digging and we're making these calls, guys, when we're reaching out, um, and we're trying to do our investigating, I did it. I did it a lot. Always thought, because I was so sold on my products, so sold on whatever I was selling at the time, that I just went in hot with the selling points, with what I liked, instead of. And I think that's what we do as salespeople a lot. We hold on to people. We hold on to what our opinions are, and what we believe so strong that we tend to go into conversations a lot, not having that open mind, especially as salespeople, that we need to have. We have to have that open mind, even though we believe that, and to be a successful salesperson, no matter what you're selling, whether it's your services, your freight, roofing, siding, anything you're selling. Um, More important is not your belief in it, but it's really uh, your belief in the value of what it can bring to your customers to fix and solve their solutions or their problems. Hey, there he is. He's back.
Hey,
Did that work?
yeah, sorry guys, I couldn't change it. David, thank you so much. I appreciate that. David says, "Don't worry, Dan. It happens to the best of us. It happens to most of us." I know. It's you.
Thanks, Dave.
You know, David, I could tell you, and no excuses. I mean, the reality is, I'm in charge of changing that thing. But DJ and I started talking, 10 minutes before we went
Oh, that
live,
was good.
and we
Yeah,
just we just get into these conversations. We're like, holy crap, it's 10 o'clock, and to serve everyone and to make sure we serve at the highest levels, we don't want to go on live at 10:05 or 10:10 because y'all are expecting us to be here at 10. So it's like, we got to go. And literally, and DJ will tell you, I'm that guy where I'm like, holy crap, it's 10 o'clock. And DJ could be in the middle of a sentence, or I could be in the middle of a sentence, like, oh my God, squirrel, hey, something shiny, something shiny. And we click live, and all of a sudden it's like, we're live. And it's like, oh my God. So, but David, I appreciate that, brother. Thank you. Sorry, DJ, I was busy typing and realized I couldn't change the title. So for all y'all watching and listening, this is not
oh, no,
about taking breaks or ambition. Today is about data. Today is about
no breaks. It's
driving
all about data
data
today.
to you. What's that?
I said, yep, no breaks. It's all about data today.
Yeah. It's no breaks. It's data. It's how does data drive our decisions? How does data drive our choices? How does data drive us to, in essence, deliver the right message to the right person? How does data allow us to see the future or predict the future as much as we could? One of my sales coaches once said, the initiation, the starting process from going from amateur to pro is when you can start predicting. And I'll share a quick story while we're waiting for Dean to jump on. Um, you know, when I really started to turn the sales game around for myself, is when I started using data to get me better results. And what I mean by that is, I'll just talk about cold calls for a second. You know, my cold calls, what would happen is I would always try something different on the initial call. And my coach said to me, he says, Dan, scripting is your best friend. And I said, scripting, really? Like, I don't want to be one of those friggin' salespeople that are like, hey, blah, 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 trying to sell me windows and doors. I want to be natural. He goes, no, it's natural. He goes, but how do you know what works until you test it and collect the data? And this is my first interaction with data. Now, not along the lines of what we're going to talk about with Dean, because Dean is market data. What is the data telling us today that we can prepare for tomorrow? Perfect example is if you saw Dean's article from 3 weeks ago at the time of this recording, where he talked about, every 100 million in infrastructure or every million in infrastructure build is 200,000 truckloads, right? And there's Dean right now, and we're just waiting for Dean's camera to come on, and then we'll jump Dean in. Dean, if you can hear us, your camera is not on. It doesn't seem. It's a black screen. And then Dean's article had said, when they spend that money, it's 200,000 loads, like flatbed trucks in the market. So if you think, now we're 6 timesing that number in order that for the new infrastructure bill. But that data that came back was really interesting, because when I started selling, asking the same question every single time I got somebody on the horn, what I did is I collected like the top 5 kind of, I'm going to call them rebuttals, but the top 5 answers to let's call them answers to my questions. Now with those questions, I was able to, there's Dean, with the understanding of what they're going to answer, I'm able to create my next level sales, which is going to be, okay, if they answer this, this is what I'm saying. And so, and if you follow the data, as simple as it seems, it's when you start predicting, and it's that initial transition from amateur to pro. And I don't want anyone that's listening to this or watching this to think amateur or pro has anything to do with tenure. I don't believe that, DJ. I believe that you can be a pro in this industry in 6 months. Listen, there's very little that takes the place of experience. Okay. So before everybody jumps down my throat, like, what do you mean, man? I've been 30 years in the business. When I'm talking a pro, I'm talking being that value, that resource, that true resource for your customers. That's a pro. The pro makes a phone call and says, what are your goals? If you close your eyes, what is the best possible outcome, and what does that look like? And the pro is the person that gets it there. Now I'll finish this thought, and then we're going to bring my man Dean in. I'm so excited to have Dean here. It's awesome. So anyways, that data comes from everywhere. So it's a conversation where you collect data. Your initial sales call is a data call. It's not a sales call. And oxymoron, jumbo shrimp. Your first phone call to a prospect is a data call. It's not a sales call. And, okay, so everybody, I'm going to stop rambling. I'm going to stop babbling. Jeff says the most important data is the data they get you inside out, which helps you drive your client's business forward. If you don't understand your client's business, you're dead in the water. Absolutely, Jeff.
Absolutely.
Now, here is my main man, Dean. How are you, brother?
Yeah, good morning. Can you hear me okay, Dan?
Oh, we can hear you great, man. We can hear you great.
Thanks for cutting me some slack while I was running late this morning.
That's okay. You owe me.
17 minutes.
Because those big invoices that I pay you every time I ask you to come on and talk to people, right? FYI, free. But anyway, so Dean, thank you so much, brother. You know what? We're so excited to have you here. I've been looking forward to today for weeks since we set it up, because there is so much happening on the data front.
Yeah.
I just shared with everybody, to give you kind of a quick recap, get you up to date where we are. Shared with them how we first met, and kind of data is the new oil. And it was like this, the skies opened up, the sun ray came down from the heavens. I was like, oh my Lord, I need to connect with this individual. So let's talk about what the data in the market, like what are some of the big topics you're chasing today on a data end, and then we'll kind of revert it back to for all the salespeople out there.
Yeah, a couple of data points. Spot rates are at record highs at the moment, and it's kind of unprecedented because we've never seen spot rates in the freight market this high. And and there's a few reasons why, notwithstanding the fact that there's as of today, a brand new record number of container ships waiting to unload off the coast, on the West Coast. There's 86. So that's 886.
Wow.
Think back to February, we had 40. This time last year, we only had about 10, right? So we've got 76 more container ships waiting to unload with 37 days to Christmas. And on those 86 container ships, there's close to 600,000 TEU. So let's assume 70% of them come off in Los Angeles. Not all of them will come off, of course, but let's say 70%.
Now, Dean, sorry, can I just interrupt? So for anyone that doesn't understand TEU, right, it's 20-foot equivalent units. So approximately that many 20-foot equivalent containers are on those ships. That's a shit ton of product.
Yeah. If you divide, I think if you divide the 600 by 2.6, you'll get the equivalent number of 53-foot vans. So it's quite a few 100,000 truckloads. But the bigger issue is,
so you go 600 divided by 2.6.
Yeah, I think that's the number, and that'll give you the number of 40-foot or number of 53-foot vans.
So I have 230.76.
Yeah, so that's how many truckloads are sitting there waiting to move. And I think the bigger story is that that freight, a lot of that freight is due to be here for this holiday shopping season. Christmas is 37 days away. It's evident that, because this is building, they aren't making a dent in it, despite what they say and how hard they're working. It's a space issue, and they just don't have the space to put the loaded containers, nor do they have space to put the empties to go back. Because remember, 2 out of every 3 containers that comes in loaded goes back empty. And those empties are needed back in Asia. So that's kind of an example of one of the data points I'm watching. But what it's done, it's changed the way that freight market balance works. So what we've got is these sort of surging volumes in certain.
You just froze there, Dean.
So Denver, Dallas, Stockton. And then other markets are light, where volumes aren't very high. So we're seeing spot rates at record high levels. They're flatlining a bit, Dan. They haven't, they've been increasing, but they kind of were flat last week. But the point is, they're still at record high levels. And I think someone asked me yesterday, why are we seeing such high spot rates in the truckload sector? And I said it's very simple. The volume of spot freight moving today is double what it was pre-pandemic. So the numbers pan out that pre-pandemic, about 14% of all freight moved on the spot market, and 86 moved on the contract market, which are your longer term contract negotiated rates, whereas the spot is sort of day of or next day type move. So it's a 1486 split. Today, it's 24% spot, right? So that leaves 76% contract. So what that means is, and it's increased this year more so than last year, even though the pandemic upset the market, the volume of spot freight moving this year is even higher than it was last year. So right now, we're seeing about a quarter of all truckload freight over 250 miles hitting the spot market. So,
Dean, would you say that would be, like, from a reasoning why?
Yep.
Do you see in the market, and does the data tell us that, okay, 24, that's a huge number to go to spot market. Is it because of the inconsistencies that shippers are having now, meaning like they can't get product in? So it's where they would normally have a single source supplier saying, okay, we're going to do 4 loads a week. Now, all of a sudden it's like, okay, no, Monday's going to have to cancel. Sorry, we don't have product. So now they have to go to spot market, are you seeing just companies transitioning more towards a spot market? And then the third question, and I know I'm asking a lot, but the third question is, do you think that would be because of the 2018-19 split where ELD came in at prices were skyrocketing, more RFPs went out that year than any other year, and then 2019 hit, so much capacity in the market, rates dropped, shippers went to the spot market to save money?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the real reason, Dan, I think it's got less to do with ELDs and RFPs. And it's got more to do with your very first point, because I think what shippers are doing, so shippers have the on-time in full metric, the OTIF. Anecdotal evidence tells us, based on conversations with shippers, they're more concerned about on time than in full. So you've got more part loads, more LTL. But because supply chains are so A, disrupted, B, short of all sorts of components, whether it's packaging for dog foods, pallets, all sorts, packaging is a really big deal for a lot of manufacturers right now. So what's happening is that there's an urgency to move freight. So because there's all of these supply chain disruptions, when a product becomes available, it has to move really quickly. And of course, the spot market is a go-to market for moving that freight. But on the flip side, Dan, truckload carriers in the contract side are still rejecting, according to our DAT data, they're still rejecting about a quarter of all loads that get tendered through the TMS systems.
Wow.
Right, so a quarter of dedicated freight is being rejected.
Yeah. A quarter of the contracted. That's crazy.
Yeah. And if you go back to 2019-18, that number was closer to 90-10 split. So obviously in bad times from a carrier's perspective, good times from a broker's perspective, when spot rates are low, carriers tend to accept a lot more of those longer term contract freight loads and less in spot. Here we're seeing, a doubling of the rejection rate, and that's sort of a nuanced problem, because you've got, I won't say there's a driver shortage, because I'm not convinced there is. I think it's a very nuanced problem. You've certainly got a capacity crunch right now, but and a surging. So when you think about, we haven't got enough trucks and drivers. That's sort of one point. Then we've got this surging demand where it's unable to meet the demand. And trucks are invariably never where the freight is. Like there's always they're not. There's always a sort of a deadhead component. I think that's growing at the moment. But what we're seeing is that I think it's, so I'll throw this out there, Dan, and I'm happy to debate it. I think it's a velocity issue. So I don't think we've got a shortage issue of trucks or drivers. I think we've got a velocity issue. And let me explain what that means. And I'll use an example. A good friend of mine spent 27 hours on a loading dock a few weeks ago to get a load of groceries. So 27 hours, you'd say, yeah, so that was a $1,500 load. Because he was delayed, he lost a $3,000 load out of Raleigh, North Carolina. Groceries are terrible, even at the best of times in terms of loading times. When he pulled up to the dock, they said, well, we only just started picking the load now, and the real reason is we just don't have any labor. So if you've got labor shortages at the warehouses and you've got fewer dock doors open, what happens is your velocity of trucks through the network slows down, effectively reducing capacity. Now, let's say 27 hours is an outlier, and I'll agree it probably is, but let's just add, 10 or 15 minutes a day to every long-haul truck with delays at warehouses because they can't find people. And I think what you've got, and so why aren't truckers complaining? Because they're making really good rates per mile. So they don't really mind if they do less miles. But our whole network, I think, has had a velocity hit. So miles are down. When you read some of the earnings reports, the large carriers will kind of confirm that. So miles per tractor week are down, but revenue per tractor week is up. So it takes the pressure off the dwell time to a degree, because your profit margins are still pretty good. But what it does, it creates this impression that we've got a driver shortage. Now, I don't think we do. I actually think we've got enough trucks to meet demand. I just don't think the trucks are where the freight is.
And when they are, their dwell time, right. I mean, so last time we had spoke, you'd said something about, I believe it was Warner, could have like a 14% increase, or was it 4 or 14% increase? 4%. 4% increase in capacity if they just reduced, I think it was 20 minutes or 30 minutes per dock that they hit. Now, 4%, people might think, well, that's not much. But if you do that across the board with the hundreds of millions of trucks, that creates a lot more capacity, because 30 minutes a day is a week and a half of productivity, full 10-hour day productivity at the end of the year. So if each truck can lose 30 minutes a day, they can get an extra week and a half, which, call it 3 trips.
Right.
3 round trips to wherever they're going, depending on where you're going. But just call it on average, say 3 in a week and a half. Because I know when I was on the asset side, we had to run X amount of trips per week in order, like, for each truck to remain profitable and all that kind of jazz. But if you think of all the companies out there, 30 minutes a day save time. We add a week and a half of productivity at the end of the year for all those companies. That number would be staggering. I hands down, staggering number.
It's also not just the truck and driver, but trailers, because warehouses are full. I've used that term advisedly, but anecdotally, everyone says that warehouse space is short in supply. Warehouses are full, mostly, although there are some people that have empty warehouses because all the freight's sitting on these big vessels waiting to unload off Los Angeles or Savannah. I think that what I've seen is that trailers have become additional storage space. So your trailer turns have been impacted because you've got a lot more drop and hook to keep the power unit rolling, but shippers are taking a lot longer to unload those trailers for the same reason it's taking longer to unload and load trucks. So you've got, and I recall, I can't say the company name, but I saw a letter from a large truckload carrier to their shipper customers and said, and this is a company that has tens of thousands of trailing units, and they said that at any given time, this was last December, so the problem hasn't changed, it's just got worse. But last December, they said that at any given time, 30%, it's 30% of our trailing pool is unavailable for dispatch because it's loaded. And the letter was talking about detention charges for shippers that didn't unload their trailers. It's the same thing that's happening at the ports, where the shippers are being charged detention time if they don't come and pick up their containers. But the problem is, where does the freight go? Where do you take the containers if those warehouses are full? Even if they're not full, how do you get trucks in and out? Because you've got fewer trucks running in the Los Angeles market because of the carb restrictions on older trucks that aren't as healthy engine-wise. So there's all sorts of things going on that are affecting the supply chain. So I think it's a velocity issue, Dan. I don't know that it's talked about a lot, but I think a lot of people have jumped on the bandwagon of there's a driver shortage. I think that's a false narrative when you don't consider the fact that drivers are making pretty good money these days. Carriers are making excellent profits. You've just got a throughput issue, and I think that's the real backlog. I think once that clears, and I think you go down the road a little bit further. What happens when all of these new trucks come out of the factories middle of next year onwards? Do we start to see a 2019 repeat where you've got excess capacity?
I've had conversations with so many sales reps over the last 2 weeks.
Yep.
Conversations with VPs of sales, because obviously my sales program, I do corporate as well as P2P, person to person.
Yep.
And I'm talking to VPs and they're like, listen, we're 68% above targets.
Yeah.
I said, I understand. That's awesome. Like, fantastic for you. But is it customers or is it capacity transactions?
Yeah.
Because if it's capacity transactions, and we saw it for all of those of us that lived 2018 into 2019, when you go from $1,100 from Toronto to Montreal to Toronto, and it literally 5 months later, midsummer 2018, right. And then February 2019 for $327, and you're talking 3/4 of a slash in pricing.
Right.
And carriers are still accepting it because there's so much capacity in the market. And then you go from, one of the best years in my 27 years, one of the best years from a profitability perspective for carriers, for asset-based companies. And for all of you watching and listening, asset-based companies are the gold standard because they make the world go round. It ain't brokers, it's assets.
Right.
But, then you look and you say, in 2019, we had more carriers go to business than I think it was the last decade combined.
Yeah, it was pretty
because
sad.
Of such. It was sad,
yeah.
sad. And then you add all the nuclear verdicts on top of it. Then you add all of these stresses coming in from every which way, from governments and everything to control the industry and reduce driver tire time and all that, blah 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 blah. And it created the perfect storm. Right. And then you
Right.
flip right it. Like I mean, I know you and I have talked about, Dean, the last 36 months in our industry has been the biggest up and down, like bull, whatever market that you would call it. Like we're on a roller coaster ride here, but it's going to turn. It's going to turn. And the customers that are paying suppliers now, that are capacity transactional customers, are going to go away. And for all of you brokers out there and carriers out there listening, put the foot on the gas to get real long-term customers where you can solve a real issue. Sanitize your entire pipeline, sanitize your entire customer list, and figure out who are transactional customers and who you're going to lose mid-2022. Because, Dean, carriers are buying equipment. It's just a matter of it's not being delivered because of the challenges, right?
Dan, I'd say make sure you pick customers that have a good memory, right? Because you know what I'm getting at, right?
Yes.
You don't want the ones that forget what we're going through right now.
Yes.
Well, and you know what? I've often said to them, have you talked to your customers about the 2018-19 transition?
Right.
And sales reps have been like, no, I haven't. I said, well, have a conversation, because they remember. They remember. And it's this thing where most of the shippers I speak to, it was like, no, we got hosed in 2018. Because I think a lot of them feel they got hosed. Because if you really look at the data when it came to ELD, the majority of the bigger size carriers were on electronic logs for 2 or 3 years at that point. Right. But it's the smaller, and the majority of our market is made up of these small people that waited till the last second. Now, we've got a bunch of comments and questions here, Dean. I'd like to go over a few of them. So Gary says, it's not just intermodal. Flatbed operations are experiencing shortages of workers, receivers, manufacturers. They say they load till 8 p.m. However, no workers now. They can't unload past 3 p.m. because they have no workers for second shift. Huge issue.
Whereabouts? Where's Gary from?
Gary, where are you from, brother?
West Coast.
So I'll give you an example. There's Royal Distributing is a company in Ontario. I think I don't know if it's in the US, but it's in Canada. And Royal Distributing is offering. So they are a company that sells like aftermarket, like Fox, racing gear for motocross, racing gear for snowmobiles, non-OEM aftermarket parts for snowmobiles, gear, helmets and all that. So they're like this action sport superstore.
Right.
They are offering $1,000 signing bonus. $1,000 signing bonus for retail clerks. Like, there's a problem when like McDonald's will give you $100 just to show up for an interview. When companies like Royal Distributing are offering $1,000 signing bonus, like a retail position.
Amazon's doing $3,000 signing bonus, up to $22 or $25 an hour, and instant health insurance and benefits day one. They're trying to get people any way they can, and they can't. Nobody's working. That's the problem.
Yeah. So Gary's from Hope, Arkansas. That's right, Gary. I should have known that. You're from Hope, Arkansas. That's right. Ryan says, I feel like long-term customers will transition to cost-plus model. Even as a broker, transparency will give longevity. You know what, Ryan? I agree with you. I think the cost-plus model is the future of logistics. I really do. And, Joe Lynch and I had a long conversation about this months ago, where it's a cost-plus. You get in, as a broker, we have 40,000 carriers in our database doesn't work anymore, because we know, and everybody's really aware of the fact that y'all don't deal with 40,000 people on a yearly basis. Like, let's be realistic, right? You deal with 2% of that 40,000, and those are your core carriers.
Right.
Gary says, being in trucking since 1978, co-op to $60 million trucking. I thought I'd seen it all, but you keep learning. Oh, yes, sir. Yes, sir. But it's funny because that long-term customer, where you sit down and you actually create solutions for. And Dean, this brings us back to data, because just that infrastructure bill that we were talking about. Like, how are these companies, right, with everything going on in the market today, and Gary, you're in this because you're flatbed, everything going on in the market today, you influx the market with an extra 1,500 loads a day.
Right.
What the heck is that going to do? And who's going to have the money, right? This is the flip side of it. Is I was speaking to somebody in the U.S. government, and they were saying, on average, about 60% of that is going to be U.S. controlled. Of that infrastructure bill is going to be U.S. controlled. So now you got 40% market, 60% government.
Right.
Who has the money to pay for because that's what it's going to come down to. Whoever has the most money is going to get the truck until capacity, until like all this new equipment gets
delivered. You see that anytime there's natural disasters too with FEMA. I mean, FEMA kind of outsources the market.
Right.
So you see the trend here with spot market. Do you think it's going to continue to go up with everything going on?
DJ, or can you ask that again, DJ? You cut out.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. So, Dean, with the spot market going up, do you see next year the trend continuing to rise? Yeah.
No. I think very quickly. I'm seeing glimpses of contract rates sort of cresting and starting to come down, but spot rates doing the same thing, because I think what's happening is that there's more volume. So as contract rates increased over the last year, more carriers had to commit to more of those loads to justify the double-digit rate increase, right? So I think you got a percentage of freight that would have normally been in the spot is moving back to contract, but I think a lot of it's moved to dedicated also. So I think what will happen is there'll be less in the spot market once this market settles down, because even Werner's last earnings call, he said 66% of our trucks are dedicated contract services, which is staggering for a truck that was used, predominantly one-way truckload. So I think there'll be a lot more dedicated contract services. And again, that comes, so yes, less spot, more contract, more dedicated. But I think what will happen is the people with short memories will go from the dedicated model back to the spot market to recoup their losses from this year, which is what they did in 2019.
Yeah, 100%.
That's the memory problem.
Right. Yeah,
I'm worried about that. But I think the big issue, though, is that there's a new floor in now for operating costs, right? So think about, carrier operating costs in 2018 and 19 are very different to 21 and going into 22, because you've got high cost of diesel, insurance. I'm paying more for every single thing I buy in my truck. I can't get Shell Rotella oil. My tires are expensive. I run a 379 Peterbilt, super expensive. And like grease and oil change the other day, new filters and oil change, $400 labor. And I'd spent $600 on oil and filters. $400 for an hour's work. Like, and I had to pay it because my usual guy said, I can't fit you in for 3 months because I can't find people. So I think we are all going to have to deal with is there's going to be a new floor to operate asset-based equipment next year. And what I'm seeing right now, and I think this is sort of what precipitates the 2019 fallout, is a lot of carriers that I talk to and work in the spot market don't know what the fuel surcharge is, right? So they're not in the all-in broker rate. They don't get the breakdown. All they see is diesel going up at the pump. And if they're not watching their operating costs really, really closely, right?
Oh, yeah.
3 months later, the fuel bill starts to eat into it. So I talk to carriers mostly about fuel as a percentage of revenue. You've got to keep it around 25%. Right now, in 2019, it was 30 when people were hurting. This time last year, when rates were really high, but fuel was like $1 a gallon lower, it was 20. So it was 19%. So 30% in 19. Last year, when fuel was low, it was like, really low, under 20. It's about 25% now. That's the number you've got to watch. And I think brokers should be invested in helping carriers manage those numbers, because that's where your capacity is. But I think that's the big thing I'm watching for is, do people hold the floor, right? Because remember, 18 months ago, we were protesting in Washington for $1 a mile rates.
Yeah. Yep.
Right? We've had cricket since then. Right?
Yeah.
Now and you could say, yeah, they probably needed to make up for what they'd had in 2019. But I just worry that we'll repeat this cycle. And that's my biggest concern in 2022.
Well, I hope we don't, because I hope asset-based suppliers stand their ground. The challenge, Dean, that I see anyways, is there'll be one that'll take it. In order for this person to compete, they have to take it. And it's that feeling of have to. You know, as a logistics professional right now, as a sales professional, your mission, everyone, have these conversations. Listen to what Dean just said. Have these conversations and say, listen, like, again, I think I said it on the last show. I'll say it again. If you have not closed out your deals now, don't expect to close any massive deal before the end of the year. But you want to know something that will create long-term client retention is right now you get with your customers and you say, listen, what are the plans for 2022? How can I set up a program to mitigate exposure, to try and cap expenses? But not only that, use what Dean just said, the floor has risen. That, I think, is one of the most powerful statements. The floor has risen. In order to help you, let's look at other areas. Maybe can we reduce dwell time if you spent $600,000 in demerge or dwell time or whatever this year? Maybe the $300,000 increase in freight, but we take away the $600,000. Now you're up $3 from this. Like put the pieces of the Jenga piece. Like this is a Jenga stack, and you're pulling pieces out without trying to make it topple. But think outside the box. Like have those conversations now. If you have a hot prospect that you're looking at closing, call them up and say, listen, I understand. 8 Mile the hell out of it. I understand we're not closing before the end of the year. What is 2022? Here is what I'm thinking. Capacity is going to switch mid-year. You know, use all this information Dean's just giving you. He's like the mastermind behind data. Like what the man just delivered is insane value if you understand how to interpret it and plug it in.
It's insane. Dean, I do want to ask one other thing if you're noticing anything with this. So Jennifer Gross, a House representative, I shared a report that she sent on November 13th saying that the ports of Houston, Texas, Florida, and Louisiana are kind of opening up and trying to take a little bit of the overflow. Is that helping some of that?
Yeah, so it's coming back to changing the whole freight dynamics, because now you've got higher volumes going into smaller port markets, and shippers have now got to find carriers, because if you go to New Orleans with a brand new service and you don't have contract rates from last year's RFP, it's going to hit the spot market. So if you think capacity is already tight, and then I'm dumping all of this volume into these sort of obscure ports, and it's happening, DJ, because a lot of folks have chartered these really small vessels, the 1,200, 1,500 TEU, and they can get into these ports that aren't deep. And I'll say that because we just bought a new car, and I said to the guy, "Where does it come from?" And he said somewhere in Rhode Island, and I said, "You can't get big ships in Rhode Island into the port." And then I realized what was going on. They were actually bringing in much smaller services.
Okay.
I think,
and Jeff says at a higher cost as well.
Yeah.
So they are. I did see that. So port congestion
on the Los Angeles area forced volume away to Seattle. The Seattle volumes went up by 25% last month. That's import, not a big container market, but it's got direct on-dock rail to Chicago, right? It's a bit like Prince Rupert, where they run four trains a day out of Prince Rupert direct to Chicago, and it's closer to China, to Seattle, than it is to Los Angeles by about 1,200 kilometers, which you would never. There's a whole geography, trigonometry thing. So what that did to the truckload market, it put a lot more volume into a truckload market that's a backhaul market, where there was more truckload capacity to haul that freight out. And that's what's happening in these other markets.
So as Kyle, welcome, my friend. Kyle says hi, and Jeffrey says at a higher cost as well. And it's true, right? Like when you bring 100%, when you bring freight into these other markets, I mean, I remember I know, Dean, I shared this with you. We had bed sheets that had to meet a CVS timeline. Right. We actually sent 2 containers. I suggested one go to the Port of Savannah. Right. We sent one to the Port of Savannah, one to LA. The one to LA was apparently on an Amazon ship, real special, $26,000 will put you on the ship, kind of special. Our Savannah got there a week and a half later, I think it was, than when it landed in California. And actually the Savannah load was the one that served CVS for their freight for this product.
Wow.
because of the delay offshore, because of the delay in rail, like it was at the big, and I won't say the names, but the big companies in LA, which I'm sure most people will know what I'm talking about, but whatever, the big companies in Long Beach, and it sat there and sat there and sat there, and our freight was on a truck, paid more, just like Jeff said, absolutely paid more from Savannah, but we got it into the distribution center, and here's the thing, saved the $4 million account.
Right.
Because at that point, when I think there's maybe a little bit more leeway, like when companies like Walmart and stuff are buying their own ships and even having the same challenges when they bought their own ships, like there's a foundational structure where companies start going, okay, maybe we can't get around it. But they didn't care. At that point, they were like, here's your cutoff. If it's not in there, I'm sorry, we're not putting your product. We'll choose somebody else's product. Just for me, I've got a product, and I went out to companies like Costco and all this, and do you know, they love the product, like love it. They were like, oh my God, this is awesome, but we can't order it. Right. And I said, why? And they said, because you'll never get it here by Christmas.
Right.
And I looked at them and they said, and that's when we would want it, because now we can, because it's a sanitizer thing. So now we can use the, getting together with family, everybody use that strategy as a marketing to sell it.
Right.
But do you know, they would not, like, and so the big retailers that we went to, the big boys,
right,
the kind of the life-changing clients,
right,
it wasn't that they didn't like the product. They love the product. It's you can't get it here for when we need it. So when we start looking at 2022, then we'll have another conversation. But I mean, that was hundreds of thousands of dollars in lost business, just because they said, will you guarantee it? Meaning, and here's the thing, right? They buy 75,000 units at $10 a unit. Am I going to guarantee that? And that kind of makes my sphincter and everything tighten up, because I'm just like, holy crap, like not a chance.
That's not a deal you want to guarantee, especially with what's going on. You just don't know.
I'm all about guarantees, DJ. I'm all about guarantees, but we just can't in today's market, right? So it's not even, it's just a matter of like all of this and all these different data points hit home.
Can I give you? Can I give you one data point that'll blow your mind?
Yes.
I saw one of the Slack, I think was from Gary Salisbury, about the length of containers. When you add up all the TEU on the vessels at anchor, not total in port, it's about 2.6 mile, 2,000. So it's about 2,400 miles, right? So to put it into context, it's about, if you put all the TEU end to end, it's about a third of the way back to Asia. Now,
wow.
So as everything with data, right, the average, I'm just looking at the port. Wait for this is staggering. On the Port of LA Signal report today, the average dwell time for a vessel at anchor is 18 days. It's 18, right? That's to get a berth. Then you're spending 4 to 5 days alongside to unload, because there's fewer ship-to-shore cranes because they can't put the containers anywhere. But as anything with bell curve distribution of data, the vessel that's been there the longest is the Bal Peace, who arrived on the 25th of September, 53 days ago, still at anchor, 53 days, came from Qingdao, China, and it's only 1,206 TEU. So it's not a big ship, but whose freight is on that boat that's been waiting 53 days already to find
plus transit.
Plus transit. I saw a great report in Quartz yesterday, and it was actually CBS 60 Minutes on Sunday, where they interviewed a guy that had an empty warehouse, and he said, it's at the port, I can't get it. And they were talking about severe financial, disaster, because they've got nothing to sell. And what one of the other interviewers was saying was, we had our summer freight was late for summer sales. We're now trying to find space for the summer and fall inventory that's late to compete with winter inventory in warehouses, and they're moving all this freight around the country to warehouse markets like Phoenix, where there's all this space, staging it to then move.
And Dean, would you agree though with the inflation that a lot of suppliers or customers are trying to bring in as much as they can?
Yeah.
While the prices are low, and that's probably a huge effect too.
There's a pull forward effect. Yeah, I think DJ, it's a great point. We noticed that again, the Port of Los Angeles put this out. They said normally we see people start to bring in import volumes in that sort of August, September timeframe. They were pulling forward freight back in June. So I think, and what people were doing, they were doubling and tripling up their order volume just to get some. So I think there's been a lot of pull forward of volume for that reason. Yeah, absolutely.
And that's a lot of money for companies to put out, a lot of product to sit on, and a lot of product. Like I can't imagine, 31 days on the water plus 50 something days offshore. You've paid for that product when it left Asia. You've paid for shipping. You've paid for everything, and you've got zero revenue to come in. I mean, that's going to be financial crisis for a lot of companies.
Well, that's crushing a lot of people for sure.
Right.
So I've got 5 minutes, guys, and I got to jump on another call. And I'm very sorry. I wish I didn't schedule a call right after this, because I should have figured this would be a 90-minute conversation. Because my man Dean just drops.
Dean, thank you so much for coming on. Seriously.
But before we go, Dean, share with us, like, again, just for everyone that's watching and listening, and maybe that wasn't here at the beginning, what are some of the timelines we can what do you think is going to happen in the next 3, 6, 9 months?
I think we've still got inflationary pressure on contract rates. I think we're going to see tight capacity certainly through the summer. I don't see things easing off until then. It's going to take months to clear this backlog of containers at ports and at intermodal rail ramps and on chassis trailers loaded with containers at shipper warehouses. At some point, the intersection of higher vaccination rates, more labour coming back into the market, people feeling comfortable with going into public spaces like warehouses. At some point, that starts to level out, barring a catastrophe like a emergence of a new variant. At some point, I'm looking at Q2 next year where we start to see a little bit of normalcy in the market. The real turning point is, of course, when a capacity comes back onto the market. So we're seeing spot rates, if anything, flat to slightly down out into the next 12 months. And contract rates, they'll still be in this sort of 8 to 10% higher range up year over year, because the contract rates that we're setting now are what the freight will be hauled at next year. And we're doing the RFPs when rates are at record high levels. So you're going to see.
Now, do you see a lot of what happened in 2019 where shippers decide that, well, I'm going to break this contract and I'm not going to give you the volume because spot markets are a better place?
It's possible. Dan, I think a lot of people have been doing mini bids to try and guarantee a small amount of capacity on a dedicated set of lanes.
Yeah.
Yep. Awesome, Dean. Dean froze on us.
Froze. I see that too.
Yeah, we can see that for sure. But the caveat is I've been wrong 1,000 times this year. And there's no economic textbook that we've got for what we're going through. But I do get a sense that there's a return to normalcy happening. I'm traveling. I just feel like people are adjusting to the new world. And once we get over. The other point, though, and it's worth maybe another show, is I'm not sure our labour shortage across all industries ever returns to normal the way it's been shown.
Right?
It's funny because Dean, I usually set you up for the next show at the end of every show, and now you set yourself up for the next show. So
I love it.
Y'all heard it live on air. 10:58 a.m. November 17th. He's coming back, baby. He's coming back.
I think it's a really good topic because my wife's catering business, we can't find staff to bus tables. Like, they're gone. They reskilled. They went to other industries where there was more certainty, or they retired. I think that's probably one of the topics that is worth discussing, because I think next year is going to be tight labor.
I agree. I have some good info for that too as well. So definitely, I'll save it for the next show. But yes.
Thanks, Dean. Appreciate you being here, my friend. You are a rock star. Thanks, DJ. This was a fantastic conversation. I hope everybody got a massive amount of gold out of it. Now the reality is, go use it. Don't just get the dopamine drip because you're here and you're like, oh my God, that's great information. Use it. Sit down, strategize. How are you going to make 2022 the best year for customers ever? And deploy it. Who cares if you're wrong? Dean, I'm wrong all the time. But you know what? The times I'm right supersede the times I'm wrong.
Exactly.
Take care, everybody.